Hi, welcome to the second video in the Lighthouse Steps Quilt Along. I'm Kate Colleran from seamslikeadream.com. And in this video, we're going to talk a little bit about cutting your fabrics for your quilt. But first, let's recap a little bit. Lighthouse Steps is this quilt right here behind me. It was one of my patterns that I had designed a few years ago. And when I had a chance to work with a new strip pack from Isla Matique called Painted Blossoms, aren't these gorgeous? I knew that I wanted to do an updated version of my Lighthouse Steps quilt. It also gave me a chance to revamp the pattern, put it in my new booklet format for the paper version, and you can actually get this pattern in paper version or as a PDF. And the links for all of this are below this video. So I thought it would be really fun to host a quilt along where we could talk a little bit about color, about some cutting tips, some sewing tips. So in this video, we're going to talk cutting tips because in the first video, we talked a lot about colors because what you need for this quilt is a strip pack or strips from your stash, a background fabric, and you pick this by knowing what's in your strip pack and then choosing something that will provide good value contrast, and then a contrast fabric. And what I did to do that was to pick these lighter strips from my strip pack and make sure that I picked a good fabric that would have contrast with my contrast. Okay, so once you've picked all your fabric, and if you want more information about what I did, you can go to the first video and see that. But once I've picked all my fabrics and once I've got my strip pack, then I had to go ahead and put them in order because there are 2 rows for this quilt and our cutting for each row is different. So you had to know exactly where each strip was going to go in your quilt before you started cutting. So we also talked a little bit about setting up your strips for each section and then taking a picture of those strips so you knew exactly where everything was going to go later on. Now, once you have all your strips organized, you know where they're going to go, then what you want to do is start your cutting. So I'm just going to flip my video for a second. Hang on. And let me just move this. Okay, so you can see here what I like to do is I like to cut just a few strips at a time. So what I did was I made sure that I started with my top section and I separated out my strips. This strip was a strip 1, went over here. This strip was a strip 2, it went over there. And then what I could do is cut all my strip 1s for my top section at once. Now I know you could probably cut all your strip 1s for the whole quilt at once. I like to work in sections. I don't know about you, but I think it's really easy sometimes to get things a little out of order or a little confused. And I want to be as organized as possible so that my quilt ends up in the order that I wanted it in. So this is how I do it. Of course, you get to do it your way and whatever way works for you. But what I like to do is start with the top section. I cut all my strip 1s, and then what I'm going to do is just put them all together with a little note. And this little note says, row 1, top section. So all these guys are going to go together. And I'm probably even going to put them in a little plastic bag. That way, they're not going to get messed up and confused with another section. And that way too, because sometimes these stickies don't stay stuck for long. And that way, if the sticky comes off, it's all contained in the plastic bag. So then after I cut all my row 1s for the top section, then I might cut all my row 2s for the top section. And I would do exactly the same thing. I would create a little sticky for it that says row 2, top section, and they would get put in their own baggie. And then I might move on to the center section, separate out my strips, row 1, row 2, and then again, I'm going to label the row 1s for the center section and my row 2s for the center section. And each of these is going to go in their own little baggie, because again, that's what works for me. Now, once I have all my rows cut, and of course I would continue on to the bottom section. One quick tip about the bottom section, there's a lot of strips there. That's your biggest section. You might decide that you want to split it up into 2 halves, just so you don't have too many strips all together and you can just really stay organized. But whatever works for you. For me, I break it up. Now, once I've got all my strips cut by section and I've separated out, I've got my row 1 strips, I've got my row 2 pieces, then what I want to do is start putting them together with my background and my contrast fabrics. So I'll go ahead and I'll cut all of my background fabrics. I'll cut all of my contrast fabrics. And then I'll take each of my baggies. This one's row 1 top section. And I'll grab all the pieces that I need of my background to make these rows. And then I'll take this and I'll take this, and they're going to go together in my baggie. And that way I've got everything I need. I can just grab this baggie and I can start making rows because I got everything I need. So I'll do that for all my row 1s for the top section, my row 2 ones for the bottom section. But my row 1s and 2s for the center section, it's a little different. Instead of adding the background fabric, what you're going to be adding is the contrast fabric. Because remember, those rows in the center section are using the contrast as their quote unquote background. So again, I will put all those pieces together, the pieces for the row 1s together with the row 1s, the pieces for the row 2s together with the row 2s. And again, I'll pop them into their own little baggie so I can just grab the baggie and know I've got everything I need to make those rows. So those are my tips on getting ready to sew your strips. So you want to make sure, again, that you stay as organized as possible, because it's really easy to do a couple of different things. It's really easy to cut a row 1 accidentally as a row 2. It's also really important that you pay attention to the size quilt you're making. Now, in this pattern, there are 2 size quilts that you can make. One is this lap size that you see here. The other is a queen. They both only use 1 strip pack. But the queen quilt, the cutting is a little different. The rows are a little longer, and you're going to add a couple borders to make it a little bit bigger. So it's really important to make sure when you're cutting that you pay attention and you're cutting your row 1 for your lap quilt and your row 2 for your lap quilt, if that's what you're doing, or your row 1 for your queen quilt and your row 2 for your queen quilt. So you make sure you're cutting the right rows and have the right pieces. And the reason I emphasize this, can you guess why? Yeah, it's because I've messed it up before myself. So, and when you've got a strip pack, you don't really have a lot of room for error, do you? So then you would have to start moving your strips around. So if you cut a row 1 that should have been a row 2, well, guess what? Now you got to move your strips around and change your color order. Not a huge big deal, but if you've got something you really like, you want to make sure that you can keep it in the order that you really like. So I hope those tips were helpful. Find a way that works for you. For me, doing it a little bit at a time, section by section, breaking up this big bottom section into maybe 2 hunks so that I can keep those row 1s and row 2s separated, put them with their background pieces, and I am ready to sew. So good luck putting all your strips together in your sections and cutting them. Make sure you stay organized. I can't wait to see what you're doing. Make sure that you go ahead if you want and post on Instagram. You can always tag me at Seems Like a Dream Quilts, or use the hashtag Lighthouse Steps Quilt Along, and I'll be able to see what you did. All right, so next week, we're going to be on to sewing those rows together, and I will give you some tips on sewing your rows next week. Now, if you want to read the blog post, I have a link to that below as well, but otherwise, get cutting, and I will see you next week. Thanks so much for watching. Happy quilting. Bye.